Hi everyone and welcome to session 9 of the Net English Route 1 training programme. So today's session is all about persuasive writing with myself, Ashleigh Potts, Director of Subject. So the overview of today's session looks like this. First of all, we're going to think about what makes a good piece of persuasion. Second of all, we're going to consider why do we use Deforest as our persuasive features. Thirdly, how do we plan effectively? Fourthly, how do you structure a fluent piece of persuasion? And finally, what tips can you take away? Now, just to be completely honest, as a teacher of 14 years, as an examiner of 8 years, as a leader in some capacity of 11 years, this is still the area of English language that I need to decode a little bit. So I'm hopefully through the rest of this presentation going to give you some little snippets of things that will really help you, because at this stage, myself, 13 years of teaching, I'm still learning about persuasive writing and how I can effectively break that down into my classroom to make my pupils create a more convincing voice in their persuasion. So hopefully by the end of this you will find some takeaway tips that you can take away and implement, and I really wish that I'd been in your position as an NQT or as newly qualified. Now the first thing that I want to show you are these two images. So what does an effective piece of persuasion include? The image on the left represents ideas, and that should be pretty obvious. So for a piece of persuasion to be effective, it needs to be engaging, it needs to be interesting, just like a piece of description needs to be, but it also needs to have a clear voice and discuss some relevant and appropriate ideas. And this is the piece of persuasion that I feel pupils struggle with the most. It's not actually the writing skills or implementing Deforest, it's actually being able to craft and create a piece of writing that's full of some ideas, and ideas that are relevant to the world that we are living in. The image on your right, the piece of thread and the needle, links to the backbone of a persuasion. For a pupil to produce an effective piece of persuasion, it's got to be really well structured, and these ideas that the light bulb represents have got to be woven and threaded throughout the piece of writing and throughout the paragraphs. I remember this idea really making sense to me several years ago after attending an AQA hub meeting in the North East. And hopefully you've watched the GIF. If you haven't, pause the audio, watch the GIF and come back to me. I can remember an AQA senior and examiner explaining a piece of persuasion using the rapid cup movement. And the whole idea was that if you imagine that each cup is a paragraph, they can't be muddled up. If they can be muddled up, that is not a clear communication and it is not a good piece of persuasion, because the ideas need to be woven throughout. So each paragraph, i.e. the cup, has a particular place and it's got to stay there for the piece of persuasion to work. So if a pupil produces a piece of writing and you can move around the paragraphs and not take away from the piece of writing, that is not a clear piece of persuasive writing. The ideas have got to be woven throughout, build on the previous paragraph and culminate in the next paragraph. And this to me was almost a moment of epiphany. So moving away from cat gifs, this slide includes a range of annotations from an AQA principal examiner. Some of the annotations were from a grade 4 piece of persuasion which was deemed to show some attempts, and the other annotations were from a grade 5 piece of persuasion which was deemed to be a clear piece of persuasion. So pause the video at this moment and see if you can identify which annotations would be grade 5 and would be from a clear and effective piece of persuasion, and remember the cat gif. So the annotations that are highlighted in green are the ones from a clear and effective piece of persuasion, grade 5 plus aspirations. And if you look at them and if you think back to the cat gif, it makes sense, this idea of all of these ideas threaded on one piece of string woven throughout the piece of writing. It's a lovely metaphor, and to me, if we can get that idea in our classrooms earlier, this should not be a lower grading piece of writing in comparison to descriptive writing, because it's exactly the same mark scheme. So there should be an identifiable argument all the way through. It should be easy to follow. The paragraph should be logical. It should maintain a perspective. Ideas should be developed. There should be a clear sequence of points. The thinking should be signed up. And you've actually got there a real good structure for a piece of persuasion. Now this slide takes us beyond grade 5. So these are the AQA annotations from a convincing piece of persuasion. So grade 8 plus. Now the ones that I've highlighted in green are the ones that I think link to this imagery of the ideas woven on a thread throughout a piece of writing in the cat gif. So the idea that there's a fluid structure. The flow should be seamless, but linking to that and going back to the light bulb image, it goes beyond the topic and it actually contextualizes and conceptualizes ideas. And this is my third or fourth session on the course, I think, and in every one of my sessions you will have seen these stars that link with these big ideas and concepts. And yes, we explore those in Year 8 Othello, we explore those in a literature essay, but by exposing our pupils to those big ideas, it enables them to actually conceptualise those ideas and transfer them into their own writing, and persuasion is a perfect place for that to take place. So now we're going to switch and just talk a little bit about Deforest and demystifying this idea of Deforest, and sometimes an obsession with Deforest. Now I remember when I started teaching persuasive writing for the first time, it was this idea that you've got to get these persuasive features in, you've got to get them in, you've got to get them in. And that's right, you do have to use a range of persuasive features and you do want to show your pupils how to use them effectively and for them to have an impact on the audience or the reader. But I also want you to think about, you can't just crowbar these into a piece of writing, and Deforest is actually, and the persuasive features are almost the second layer to a piece of persuasive writing. The first thing that you need to make sure that your pupils are able to do is to create a voice and come up with an idea, and then think about, well, how is that idea going to develop? How does that idea link to society? How does it link to the economy? How does it link to the younger generation or the future? And then Deforest is actually a tool set, a toolbox to make those ideas more engaging. So the ideas and the fluency have to come before the crafting of language. And it's a building process. You can't start with a repetition or a statistic if the planning and the cultivation of an idea and the fluency of a piece of writing hasn't been considered first. The planning element of persuasive writing really determines success for any ability of any year group in our pupils. And just like with analytical writing, planning is a key component rather. It has to be modelled. We can't just expect our pupils to know how to plan for persuasive writing. It needs to be regularly integrated in our pedagogy, and only then will your pupils be able to successfully plan a piece of persuasion and craft a piece of persuasion. And if you have a look at the image at the bottom with the green boxes, I have taken the features from AQA's annotations to kind of build through this process. So first of all, pupils have to think about ideas, and if they are able to contextualise them and link them to big ideas, conceptualise them, go beyond the statement or the topic of whatever they're writing about. Only once they've formulated those ideas, they then need to think about, well, how am I going to structure it? What am I going to start with? How am I then going to deepen that idea? What am I going to springboard onto? How am I coming back to the idea? And once that outline's there, you then layer up with Deforest and the deliberate crafting of language. Persuasion is all about empowering pupils to have a clear voice and viewpoint about a topic. So this slide includes an example from the Year 8 poetry scheme. So it includes a topic about war. It doesn't identify a genre, but the GCSE example is a potential question where the genre of an article for a newspaper is identified. The first thing that we need to think about is, how are we going to, in our classrooms, empower our pupils to decode the statement and actually work it out? So the Year 8 topic is war and the GCSE topic is travel. Both two massive topics with multifaceted dimensions to them. So if we take the travel one, for example, the first part of the statement, travel is a huge benefit to a young person. It's clearly a positive opinion, but it says to a young person. Does travel not also benefit older people? It is adventurous, educational and creates memories for life. Lovely triplet that is then used as a springboard to think about all of the other benefits for travel. But how are you going to get your pupils to think about the potential problems as well? Yes, it is adventurous, it is educational, it does create memories for life. But there are also obstacles to being able to experience all of those things. Everyone should travel as much as possible. Travel as much as possible. Well, there's actually limitations on how much we can travel. Work, family commitments, the cost of it. So we need to be making sure that in our lessons we are creating opportunities for our pupils to think about the wider world, and this is the area that I think pupils find the most difficult. And what we've got to do as educators is expose them regularly to things beyond the classroom. And again, it goes back to those conceptual ideas. The more big ideas that we can expose our pupils to on a day-to-day basis means that they've got a better chance of being able to develop a valid, powerful, effective and convincing voice. And this is where persuasion comes in. The next layer to our planning strategy is to think about the topic that pupils are given, because remember that's also a potential barrier. When we are asking our pupils to write a piece of persuasion, we, or an exam board, are giving them the topic, and it could be a topic that A, they don't know anything about. They're not well informed enough to be able to formulate an opinion. Or B, a topic that they've got no interest in. And again, that goes back to why persuasion is often at GCSE standard marked lower than your descriptive writing. So this is another element to our planning strategy. So many times I have read not just Year 11 work, but pupils from across the secondary sector starting some sentences or a paragraph with the idea of agreeing or disagreeing with the statement. For a piece of persuasion to be effective, it's not just about the statement that's given, it's the topic. And remember that the topic and the statement is a springboard to further conceptual ideas. So, a way that I would break it down for my pupils is, we'll stick with the travel example because I did on the previous slide. So the idea of travel. So what are the benefits of travel? Lower ability pupils might respond more to the phrase positives, but think about the benefits. The benefits to not only individuals, but the benefits to society. And then we've got the idea of a conceptualized response. As well as looking at the benefits, be thinking about the potential problems and the consequences if something goes wrong. Because we all know that including a counter-argument can often make our persuasion more effective if done correctly. This is an example snippet from a recent Year 11 lesson. So on the left hand side I've included the benefits to travel, and on the right hand side the potential problems to travel. As you can see, they go beyond the statement, and they also link to some of the conceptual ideas. So for example, the clear one for the problems to travel that I believe are the idea of the negative impact on the environment. And we can link that to the future, the younger generation, and morality straight away. So we're linked into those bigger ideas and we're adding more context. And in doing so, developing a more engaging and convincing voice. The idea of travel is deepened. Now, once you have taught your pupils how to decode a statement, how to think beyond the statement and think about the potential problems, the benefits, can you then apply Deforest? You can't expect pupils to apply Deforest before they've been given an opportunity to formulate an idea. So if we think about Deforest, once I had my ideas mapped out, I would then be thinking, well, where's an appropriate place for me to use emotive language? Well, a perfect place for me to use emotive language might be when I am talking about the potential problem and the negative consequences of travel on natural and peaceful habitats. I might include a statistic when I'm talking about the real life education that travel offers. And I might reinforce that when I talk about the economy boost for around the world and the importance of being a global citizen. So only once you have mapped your ideas out can you then think of appropriate places where you can apply an effective persuasive feature. Going back to my previous slide, you can't crowbar these in, and you can't start a piece of persuasion with just those persuasive features. They've got to add to the ideas to make the persuasion and convert it into something engaging and convincing. So we have two possible structures for persuasive writing in the English recipe book. The first thing that's really important to say is that one's not better than the other. They both just have slightly different approaches and slightly different structures. The second thing that's really important to say is certain academies are taking different approaches, and we do want a whole academy approach. So just make sure that the approach that you are taking is your academy's approach to teaching this topic. So the first possible structure, it starts with a genre opening, obviously, where it's a very brief opening that fits the genre, purpose and audience. AQA are very adamant that they don't kind of want things crowbarred in just to make it look like a article. So it's got subheadings, it's got an image, it's got a caption. Persuasive writing, like I've reiterated many times, is just about pupils being able to produce a good piece of writing where they have a clear viewpoint. So the genre opening should be very, very brief. It then opens up with a shocking statistic, and in that shocking statistic, it's then unpacked and it's explained. Other potential areas Deforest that can be included are a triplet, repetition, facts, figures, collective pronouns for direct address and so forth. So the idea is you open with a shocking statistic that grabs the reader's attention, but then it's unpacked and there's an explanation as to why that statistic is so shocking. This approach then moves from numbers to individuals and gives an emotive example. So it could be a slight anecdote, but it gives an individual stance. And in this example, we would really encourage some emotive language, maybe a one-sentence paragraph, and this idea of a semantic field of the past and childhood and innocence and purity, and the idea that whatever the topic is, it could have maybe corrupted something. We then move on to potential problems and explanations. And then that is developed further by offering another point of view. So potential counter-argument, or having your explanation reinforced by a counter-opinion. Finally, we want to end on a solution, and it's at this moment that I'd really be bringing in the concept of the future. So what is the future going to look like for this topic? Is it going to be positive? Are there going to be potential problems if we don't intervene? And if we do need to intervene to prevent a problem escalating, what are we going to do? And ideally, we want to end with that circular structure. So that shocking statistic from the start, can we repeat that at the end? So this first structure contextualises and conceptualises ideas. We've then got a fluid structure where if we think back to the cat gif, it wouldn't make sense if the other points of view paragraph started first. It's got to start with that shocking statistic because everything's then built on it and then it comes back to it. If we think about paragraph 6, the solution, we couldn't start with that. So if you think about that idea and that explanation from that AQA senior examiner, if this possible structure is done effectively and correctly, it should formulate a clear persuasion from a structural perspective. And the final piece to the layer is obviously that deliberate crafting and that application of Deforest, not the crowbarred approach, but the deliberate and precise application of it. And our second possible structure. So instead of starting with a shocking statistic, it starts with an emotive anecdote. So envisage this. And the idea for this structure is After you decide whether you've got a positive or a negative stance on the topic, you then create and envisage this paragraph which uses the effective elements of descriptive writing, which our pupils are really effective doing, and actually transferring those skills into this. So we want that positive or negative description based on the focus of the statement or the topic. We want emotive language, some figurative language, and some repetition for effect. We then want a one sentence paragraph to question the audience and to question the topic. And then it goes back in time. So this structure mirrors our structure for paper 1, question 5 and descriptive writing. So by enabling you to go back in time, again, it's got that fluid structure where it can't be moved around. And in the past section, if it's done effectively, you can create a lovely contrast between envisage this scenario now, well actually it used to be better than this, or actually it used to be worse than this. And then we have the viewpoint, which needs to be developed. It needs to have reference to conceptual ideas. It needs to include a counter-argument, potential problems, explanations. So the viewpoint section of this structure covers a wide range of the different paragraphs in the previous structure. So for example, the statistic, the unpacking, the problem, the explanation, the other perspectives, all of those go into that viewpoint section. And it ends by referring to the present and looking towards the future. And again, it's this moment that I would be referring to those key conceptual ideas of the future, society, the younger generation, and be thinking about how society is going to continue to function with this problem. If it's a problem, what do we need to do to intervene? If it's not, if it's something to be celebrated, how are we going to make sure that that's protected and we're going to continue to be able to do so? And again, that idea of ending with a circular structure, linking back to the image that's created at the start to reinforce that. So please take some time, please pause the video, have a read through of both of the worked examples, see if you can spot the similarities between them. It should be easy to spot the similarities rather than spot the difference. But the key thing that they both do is it's a fluid structure where it can't be moved around, and it's the ideas are threaded and woven throughout it. So, what teaching tips have I got for you to take away? Now, I'm hoping that through the next few slides, I can give you some little snippets that I did not know when I was in the first few years of my English teaching career. So, the first thing that is a real foundation of persuasive writing is to regularly recall and deepen semantic fields for conceptual ideas. So, for example, society. What are the general potential problems of society, and what words and phrases can we use to describe them? Page 52 of the English language recipe book has got loads of these semantic fields in there, but how are you going to include these in your daily pedagogy? Are you going to use them as a bell task? Are you going to revisit them? If so, how often? Secondly, the integration of discourse markers into your lessons. So discourse markers are particularly effective at the start of a paragraph, but also used to signpost where your pupils are going to go with a topic, with their ideas. So there's some example discourse markers there. How are you going to get your pupils to embed those? And finally, for this slide, to regularly recall and deepen transferable phrases that can be widely adapted. So, for example, envisage this, a crumbling shadow of a what? Well, if the topic that was being discussed was education, a crumbling shadow of a child. The second one, however, times were not always as tough. We once lived in a close-knit community, a safe environment where we all looked out for each other if we were talking about the issue of crime. The third one, undoubtedly life in 2020 is tough and we have a lot of societal issues that our predecessors did not need to deal with, is something that can be dropped into everything. If you were with your pupils discussing the issues of social media, that would be a perfect one to drop in there. And the final one, the time is now. We must accept that we cannot continue to destroy our world if we're talking about climate change. If we use the you do, we do, they do mantra, so the idea that you constantly model something to your pupils, then you collaboratively do it, and then pupils either with their shoulder partners or independently do it, the skill is going to deepen and deepen, but it's got to be revisited. So next teaching tip to take away is to explicitly teach how to link paragraphs into your lessons. So I've got the image of the thread and the needle again, because remember we need that fluid structure throughout. We need those ideas woven throughout, and only then will we be able to complement that structure with the application of Deforest for some deliberate crafting. So as you can see on the right hand side is the opening to, well, not just the opening, a couple of paragraphs on the topic of travel. So if we have a look at the words and phrases that I've highlighted in red first of all. So envisage this, a glowing young adult. So this idea of how travel has positive benefits on the young individual. Then in my second paragraph, when I've talked about what travel used to be like, I've referred to our grandparents were probably not the first generation. So I have got an explicit link between those paragraphs, the idea of the younger and the older generation. If we then move on to the bits that I've highlighted in blue, free of the worries of modern life. This is an individual who is free to escape, free to make new friends, free to make memories that last a lifetime. So again, really reinforcing the benefits that travel can have on young individuals. But then when I go to my third paragraph, the past paragraph, they were not free in the sense we are today. So again, there's that explicit link back, and go back to the cat gif. That third paragraph would not make sense first. The argument is being built up. The ideas are fluent. And finally, so the green text in the first paragraph. This idea of this triplet, an adult who has been lucky enough to travel, explore and be educated in the real world. Again, in the third paragraph, I've linked back to that. But their holidays were not exploratory or educational. And the fact that I'm repeating that phrase and those adjectives shows my reader, shows my audience, shows my examiner that I do have a fluid structure and I have deliberately crafted this piece of persuasion. Now, this is a hard skill to do. It would have to be broken down, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence. But if you do, our pupils will do. Deforest reflection and deforest mirroring. We obviously have to teach our pupils to check their work, and I'm a very keen advocate of doing that, not just at the end of a piece of writing, because if we leave it until the end, our pupils might realise that they haven't done something and there's actually no time to do anything about it in an assessment context. So we really need to advocate to our pupils that after every paragraph they need to be reflecting on their writing skills. So this is a prime opportunity for some Deforest reflection if we're thinking about that skill of being able to use engaging vocab, linguistic devices, and to ultimately craft a piece of writing. So on this slide is an example taken from one of my lessons on persuasive writing, where I have asked pupils to colour code the different areas, the different features of Deforest which they have used, and then to just write a little reflection. So I have used an anecdote, repetition, emotive language, triplets, but there are elements of Deforest that I haven't used. So I must make sure that continuing my piece of persuasion, I integrate those, because remember, we want a range of persuasive features. We don't want to overdo rhetorical questions, and believe me, rhetorical questions is always the element of Deforest that is heavily overused. Once you get pupils being able to reflect and then think about how they can use the other elements of Deforest, we can also think about how we can mirror persuasive features. So, for example, if we can have a look at the first bit of blue in the first paragraph. So this idea of free to escape, free to make new friends, free to make memories that last a lifetime. And then if we have a look in our third paragraph, we've got a very similar sentence structure. They drank, they ate, they went to the beach at 7:30 to ski with their sun lounger. They were not free in the sense that we are today. Now, if we think about those two elements of Deforest, so we've got the repetition of free and we've got the repetition of they. Those two uses of repetition mirror each other in the structural element, but they have a different impact. They have been deliberately crafted to look like each other, but have a different meaning behind them. So, final teaching tip to take away, and it is one that I have mentioned earlier whilst talking through the possible structures for persuasive writing, is reference to the future and making sure that we can encourage our pupils to use a circular structure. Personally, I have never found a circular structure being an obstacle to pupils, no matter of age or ability. It's generally a structure that pupils can really get to grips with and use. And if you're thinking about the organisation of a piece of persuasion, it goes against that cat gif. That will be the last time that I mention it, I promise. So if you're using structure 1, go back to your shocking statistic. If it's a negative shocking statistic, what do we as a society need to do to counteract that problem and to look towards the future? If you are using the second possible structure from the Net English Language Recipe Book, go back to the individual that was described at the start. So the right hand side of this includes an example. So it starts with the present and it ends with the present. It starts with this crumbling shadow of a man who's been grated down by society's hardships and is described in a very negative way. But it ends with, envisage this, the smiling, hard-working man holding out a friendly and hopeful hand to those in need around them. This is the world we need to strive for. Okay? So although it's got a circular structure, it starts and it ends with the present, and it starts and it ends with these men, the tone of it's different. And again, we've got a conceptualised idea with regards to society, responsibility. We've got a very fluid structure. These paragraphs could not be swapped around. They are very clearly the start and the end of a piece of writing, and there is deliberate crafting. So we can now draw everything together for session 9 from all sides now, writing for persuasion. And at this point, after watching and listening to the presentation, I really hope that you can articulate what makes a good piece of persuasion. Secondly, you understand why we use Deforest, but most importantly, you are now thinking about how your pupils are going to apply it, but more so when they are going to apply Deforest, because they can only apply Deforest effectively once they have planned their ideas. Thirdly, how to plan effectively in thinking about the different layered approach. So first of all, identifying the genre, decoding the statement, thinking about the topic, thinking about the benefits, potential problems, not just thinking about, oh, I'm agreeing or disagreeing with that statement, but using the topic in the statement as a springboard. And then, and only then, applying Deforest. Thinking about the structure of a piece of persuasion and how we can ensure that fluency between paragraphs. Final time, remember the cat gif. And I'm really hoping that you've taken away a plethora of tips that you can apply immediately within your pedagogy. I'll go back to something that I said at the start. Personally, I've always felt that persuasive writing is the weakest area of my teaching. And it wasn't until I realised the ideas and the structure have got to be in place first before we apply Deforest. Please take the time to read through the worked examples in the recipe book. If anybody wants some examples of pieces of persuasion that received full marks, please let me know. Please email me on a.potts@northerneducationtrust.org, because I've got those at my disposal. I can send you them. But be thinking about real life persuasion and be thinking about that fluency of the ideas more so than feature spot on. Oh, look, instead of saying to your pupils, look, this is Joe Biden's victory speech, don't focus on the persuasive features. Think about the structure and think about how the ideas are woven throughout. Please remember that there are resources in the English language recipe book and also on our YouTube channel. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you very much for your time. I do hope that you found this useful. And again, if you would like any examples of any lessons on persuasive writing, any pupil work, and like I said, any AQA examples, please drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to provide those for you. So thank you very much and take care.